In 1943, German U-boat commanders believed they ruled the Atlantic, striking Allied convoys at will. But overnight, everything changed. A secret Allied weapon hidden in plain sight began tracking their every move. Suddenly, U-boats that once vanished into the deep were being hunted down with deadly precision. What was this invisible technology that turned the tide of the war? This is the untold story of how Huff-Duff made the hunters the hunted and doomed the U-boat fleet. The Atlantic Ocean, 1943. The night is black, the waves cold and endless. Somewhere beneath the surface, a German U-boat glides silently, its crew tense and alert. For years, these steel predators have haunted the shipping lanes, sinking Allied convoys with ruthless efficiency. The U-boat captains are confident, even arrogant. They believe they are invisible, untouchable, the masters of the sea. But tonight, something is different. As the U-boat's radio operator taps out a coded message to headquarters, a signal leaps invisibly through the ether. Hundreds of miles away, in a cramped room filled with strange equipment, an Allied operator's headphones crackle to life. He scribbles a note, calls out a bearing, and within minutes, a destroyer changes course, engines roaring, guns ready. The hunter is about to become the hunted. In the early years of World War II, the Battle of the Atlantic was a struggle for survival. Britain depended on supplies from America: food, fuel, weapons, and men. The German U-boat fleet, the Kriegsmarine's pride, was determined to cut that lifeline. In 1942 alone, over 1,000 Allied ships were sunk, and the U-boat captains became legends. Names like Kretschmer, Preen, and Shepke whispered in fear and awe. The Allies tried everything to fight back. They built more ships, armed their convoys, and sent out patrol planes. But the U-boats were elusive, slipping away before they could be found. The ocean was vast, and the submarines could hide almost anywhere. For every U-boat destroyed, more seemed to take its place. But beneath the surface of this deadly game, another battle was raging, a battle of signals and secrets. Every time a U-boat sent a message to headquarters, it risked being heard. The Germans believed their Enigma codes were unbreakable, and for a time, they were right. But the Allies had a new weapon, one the Germans never suspected: the ability to find a radio signal's direction, even if they couldn't read its contents. The technology was called high-frequency direction finding, HFDF, or Huff-Duff. It was simple in concept, but revolutionary in practice. When a U-boat transmitted, its signal spread out in all directions. Allied listening stations, scattered across the Atlantic and on ships at sea, could pick up the signal and determine the direction it came from. With 2 or more bearings, they could pinpoint the U-boat's location, sometimes within minutes. The Germans never realized how vulnerable their radio transmissions made them. They believed that as long as they kept their messages short, they were safe. But Huff-Duff was fast enough to catch a U-boat even during a brief burst of Morse code. The Allies didn't need to break the code to know where the enemy was. All they needed was the signal. The first tests of Huff-Duff were promising, but the real breakthrough came when the technology was installed on ships. Now convoys could hunt the hunters. When a U-boat surfaced to send a message, the destroyers in the escort group would swing their antennas, plot the bearing, and race toward the source. The U-boat, thinking it was safe, would suddenly find itself under attack, depth charges exploding, sonar pings echoing, and the surface alive with searchlights and gunfire. For the U-boat crews, the change was terrifying. Attacks came faster, more often, and with deadly accuracy. The ocean, once a place of shadows and hiding places, became a trap. The captains grew cautious, Then, desperate, some stopped transmitting altogether, cutting themselves off from headquarters and from each other. The wolf packs, once so effective, began to fall apart. The spring of 1943 marked a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. For the first time, Allied convoys began to cross the ocean with growing confidence. The U-boat threat, once so terrifying, was being blunted by a combination of new tactics, improved weapons, and most of all the invisible power of Huff-Duff in war rooms from London to Washington. Commanders pored over reports of U-boat sinkings and convoy arrivals, searching for the pattern behind the sudden shift in fortunes. On the surface, the convoys looked much the same as they always had: long lines of merchant ships, flanked by destroyers and corvettes, braving the vast, grey Atlantic. But beneath the decks, in cramped radio rooms, a new breed of sailor was at work. These were the Huff-Duff operators, young men and women trained to listen, to analyze, and to act in seconds. Their equipment was simple: a set of headphones, a rotating antenna, and a chart for plotting bearings. But their impact was profound. When a U-boat surfaced to send a message, the operator would catch the faint signal, spin the antenna to find the direction, and call out a bearing. If another ship in the convoy did the same, the two bearings could be crossed on a map, revealing the U-boat's position. The information was relayed to the escort commander, who would order a turn, increase speed, and prepare for battle. Sometimes, the U-boat would be caught on the surface, its crew scrambling to dive as shells and searchlights rained down. Other times, the destroyers would use sonar to track the submarine underwater, dropping depth charges in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Germans, for their part, were slow to realize what was happening. They noticed that their attacks were less successful, that their losses were mounting, but they could not explain why. Some suspected that the Allies had broken the Enigma code, but the real secret was even simpler. Every time a U-boat transmitted, it gave itself away. The impact on U-boat morale was devastating. Captains who had once prowled the Atlantic with impunity now found themselves hunted, their every move anticipated. The wolf pack tactics that had brought so much success, coordinated attacks by groups of submarines, became dangerous. To coordinate, the U-boats had to communicate. To communicate, they had to transmit, and every transmission was a risk. One U-boat officer wrote in his diary, "We are like fish in a barrel. The enemy always seems to know where we are. We change frequencies, we shorten our messages, but it makes no difference. The sea is no longer ours." The Allies, meanwhile, refined their tactics. Convoy escorts began to use radio silence to avoid giving away their own positions, while encouraging the U-boats to transmit as much as possible. Deceptive signals, false messages, and even fake convoys were used to lure the submarines into traps. The Huff-Duff network grew, with new stations built on remote islands and lighthouses, and on ships at sea. The entire Atlantic became a web of listening posts, all tuned to the faint signals of the enemy. The technology itself continued to improve. Early Huff-Duff sets were large and cumbersome, but by 1943, compact versions could be installed on even the smallest escort ships. Training programs were expanded, and the best operators were sent to the most dangerous convoys. The result was a force multiplier. Every ship with Huff-Duff became a hunter, every convoy a trap. The effect on the U-boat fleet was catastrophic. In May 1943 alone, 41 U-boats were sunk, more than in any previous month of the war. The German High Command, alarmed by the losses, ordered a temporary halt to U-boat operations in the Atlantic. For the first time, the Allies had seized the initiative. But the battle was not over. The Germans responded with new tactics of their own. They developed Metox radar detectors to warn of approaching aircraft, improved their torpedoes, and experimented with new forms of communication. Some U-boats were equipped with snorkel devices, allowing them to run their engines underwater and avoid detection, but none of these innovations could match the speed and flexibility of the Allied radio network. The autumn of 1943 brought a new reality to the Atlantic. The once invincible U-boat armada was now on the defensive, its captains wary, its wolf pack scattered. The Allies pressed their advantage, expanding the Huff-Duff network and refining their tactics with every crossing. Convoy after convoy made the perilous journey from North America to Britain, and with each successful arrival, the balance of the war shifted further in the Allies' favor. On board the escort ships, Huff-Duff operators became the unsung heroes of the convoys. They worked in cramped, dimly lit cabins, headphones clamped to their ears, hands poised over dials and plotting charts. Every night, as the convoy plowed through the darkness, they listened for the telltale bursts of Morse code that signaled a U-boat's presence. Sometimes the signals were faint, distorted by static and distance. Other times, they were clear and urgent, a wolf pack assembling, a captain reporting a sighting, a desperate call for help. When a signal was detected, the operator would swing the antenna, find the bearing, and call out the direction. The information was relayed to the bridge, where the escort commander would make a decision, change course, increase speed, or launch a search. The destroyers and corvettes would fan out, their searchlights sweeping the waves, their depth charges ready. The U-boat, caught off guard, would dive, but the Allies were already closing in. The Germans tried to adapt. They ordered their captains to keep transmissions as short as possible, no more than 20 seconds. If they could help it, they experimented with new codes, new frequencies, and new tactics. Some U-boats began to operate alone, avoiding the wolf pack tactics that required constant communication. But the need to report, to receive orders, to coordinate attacks was inescapable. Every time a U-boat broke radio silence, it risked detection. The psychological toll on the U-boat crews was immense. The ocean, once a place of freedom and opportunity, became a prison. Every message sent was a gamble. Every order received a potential death sentence. Captains grew paranoid, some refusing to transmit at all, others sending only the bare minimum. The sense of invincibility that had once defined the U-boat fleet was gone, replaced by fear and uncertainty. Meanwhile, the Allies continued to innovate. New types of Huff-Duff sets were developed, smaller and more sensitive, able to pick up even the faintest signals. Aircraft were equipped with direction-finding gear, allowing them to hunt U-boats from the sky. Coastal stations, some hidden in remote lighthouses or disguised as fishing shacks, extended the network's reach across the Atlantic. The entire ocean became a web of listening posts, all tuned to the enemy's frequency. The results were dramatic. In the last months of 1943 and into 1944, U-boat losses mounted. Convoy battles that once ended in disaster for the Allies now turned into routes for the Germans. The wolf packs, unable to coordinate, were picked off one by one. The U-boat bases in France and Norway became graveyards, their pens filled with damaged and abandoned submarines. The story of Huff-Duff was still a closely guarded secret. The operators who played such a crucial role were rarely mentioned in dispatches or news reports. Their work was invisible, their victories unheralded. But among the men who sailed the convoys, their reputation was legendary. The man with the headphones, one sailor said, was worth a dozen guns. As the war entered its final phase, the U-boat fleet was a shadow of its former self. The captains who had once boasted of their kills now spoke of survival, of making it home alive. The Allies, confident in their technology and their tactics, pressed the attack. The Atlantic, once the most dangerous battlefield in the world, became a highway for victory. After the war, the full story of Huff-Duff began to emerge. Historians and veterans alike marveled at the impact of a technology that had changed the course of the conflict. The lessons learned in the Atlantic would shape the future of naval warfare, laying the groundwork for the electronic battles of the Cold War and beyond. But for the men who had lived through those years, the memories were personal. They remembered the long nights, the tension of waiting for a signal, the thrill of a successful hunt. They remembered the friends they lost, the ships that never made it home, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, in their own way, they had helped to win the war. The legacy of Huff-Duff is not just a story of machines and signals. It is a story of people, of the scientists who built the first receivers, the operators who listened in the dark, and the sailors who trusted their lives to a voice on the radio. It is a story of ingenuity, courage, and the relentless pursuit of victory. The final year of the war saw the U-boat fleet in full retreat, battered by Allied technology and tactics it could never match. The once proud captains, who had prowled the Atlantic with impunity, now found themselves hunted, their every move anticipated by an enemy they could not see. Huff-Duff, the invisible weapon, had turned the ocean into a trap. In the spring of 1944, as the Allies prepared for the D-Day landings, the importance of secure supply lines became greater than ever. Convoys carrying men, tanks, and ammunition crossed the Atlantic in a steady stream, and the U-boats made one last desperate effort to stem the tide. But the network of Allied listening posts, now more extensive and sophisticated than ever, caught nearly every transmission. Escort ships and aircraft converged on the U-boats with deadly precision. The wolf packs, once the terror of the seas, were decimated. On board the U-boats, morale collapsed. Crews lived in constant fear, knowing that every message sent could bring death from above or below. Some captains refused to transmit at all, cutting themselves off from headquarters and from each other. Others tried to outwit the Allies with new codes and tactics, but nothing worked. The ocean, once their hunting ground, had become a graveyard. For the Allies, the victory in the Atlantic was a triumph of science and teamwork. The Huff-Duff operators, once anonymous figures in the shadows, were recognized for their vital role. Their work had saved thousands of lives, kept the supply lines open, and made the liberation of Europe possible. The scientists who had developed the technology were honored, their inventions celebrated as one of the great achievements of the war. After the surrender of Germany, the full story of Huff-Duff was revealed. German officers, stunned by the scale and effectiveness of the Allied network, admitted that they had never understood how their submarines were being found. Some believed the Allies had developed a new kind of radar. Others suspected spies or traitors. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Every time they spoke, someone was listening. The legacy of Huff-Duff lived on. And the years after the war, the principles of high-frequency direction finding were applied to new forms of warfare: electronic intelligence, signals interception, and cyber operations. The idea that information could be as powerful as firepower became a cornerstone of military strategy. The men and women who had listened, and the dark who had plotted bearings and called out warnings back, aimed the ancestors of a new generation of warriors, those who fight with data, with code, and with the Invisible weapons of the modern age. For the veterans of the Battle of the Atlantic, the memories remained vivid. They remembered the tension of the long nights, the relief of a safe arrival, the sorrow of ships lost and friends gone. They remembered the pride of knowing that, in a war of giants, their quiet work had made all the difference. The story of Huff-Duff is a story of transformation. It is the story of how a handful of scientists and sailors, armed with little more than curiosity and determination, changed the course of history. It is a story of how the hunters became the hunted, and how the invisible became the decisive, as the decades passed. The lessons of the Atlantic were not forgotten. In every navy, in every command center, the importance of listening, of understanding, of acting on information became a guiding principle. The ocean is still vast, the threats still real, but the legacy of Huff-Duff endures a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one the enemy never sees.